everyone. Welcome to today's program. We are so happy to be joined by so many advisors and nonprofit leaders today. We had an outstanding response for this topic, and so I think it's something very needed, and we have a great expert with us today to give us some insight. I'm Allison Helen, Director of Research Advocacy and Advisor Engagement at MCF. I want to thank all of you for the work that you do to advance philanthropy with your clients, with your colleagues, and with your communities. We are always happy and honored to participate and partner with you in these conversations and to help you and your clients find ways to meet their charitable giving goals. We have a great program for you today. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. First of all, for those of you who are practicing attorneys in the state of Wisconsin, this program has been approved for 1.5 CLE credits if you are watching it live. If you are watching a replay of this program, it does not count towards credit. The other thing I wanted to let you know is we will be hosting 2 additional webinars coming up this year. The first will be held on May 21st, and that will be Establishing and Managing Private Operating Foundations. That will feature Johanna Alex, an attorney at Stafford Rosenbaum, and Becky Steinhoff, the Executive Director of the PRL Keystone Foundation. You're going to receive a registration link for that webinar in the follow-up email we send you after this program. So please plan on joining us on May 21st for that. In the meantime, I did want to remind you about a couple of other resources that are always available to advisors and nonprofit leaders. You can always watch replays of our advisor webinars on our website. If you go to the advisor section and go to webinars, they are all posted there all the way back until 2024. And you can see presentations on a variety of topics from both local and national experts. The other thing that you might want to look at is our Advisor Insights blog. We cover a number of different topics related to the work we do at MCF and just general charitable planning. So if you're looking for articles on CLTs, CRTs, CGAs, all of the alphabet soup of charitable planning, or you just want to get a better idea of the types of funds that MCF provides, that is a great resource to visit as well. Lastly, if you have any suggestions for further webinar topics, please let me know. This webinar today actually came through a suggestion I received from somebody in our advisor community. So obviously there's a lot of interest in this area. So if there's something that you would like to see, it's likely that a lot of your colleagues would also like to see it. So please just let me know. My contact information is up there. Lastly, if you have any questions for Kirby during her presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, with all of that out of the way, I'm very excited to be joined today by Kirby Rosplock of Tamarind Partners, Inc. Kirby is the founder of Tamarind Partners, which is a research, advisory, and consultancy firm where she and her team work with families, operators, advisors, and institutions connected to the family office landscape. She provides leading-edge insights, knowledge, and family education that is curated, practical, and hands-on. She is Dean of Family Office at the Purposeful Planning Institute, a board member of the Family Office Real Estate Institute, and a fellow and former family governance faculty of the Family Firm Institute. She's also co-trustee of the Harbeck Family Foundation and on the advisory board of Merton Venture Philanthropy. And in addition to all of that, she is also the author of multiple books, including this one, the Complete Family Office Handbook, a guide for affluent families and advisors who serve them. Those of you who submitted questions prior to the webinar will be entered into a drawing for a copy of Kirby's book. We actually have one physical copy to raffle and one ebook. So we will be giving both of those away. We'll do it after the webinar, and we will contact the winners to coordinate delivery. So with all of that said, I am happy to turn things over to Kirby Rosplock.
Hi, great to be with you all today. Thank you so much for those of you who are able to be here actually on the call, and hopefully those who are going to listen to us later. I have a lot to cover in the time that we've mapped out, so I'm going to do my best to power through some slides. I'm going to ask Allison and Lex to give me help if you have questions as we go along, and I'll try to do my best to answer those at the end. Thank you to those of you who sent me some questions in advance. That's really helpful. I'm going to try to weave those in as well as we're going along today. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about how is philanthropy working inside the family office? And I'm also expanding it, full disclosure, to impact as well, because I feel like the two of those go hand in hand. We're going to talk about some structures, some roles, and really about responsibilities, who's doing what, and decision rights. So at the end, I'm going to give you a little model and a framework that might be helpful to think about when you're applying or working with families. Here's my agenda, and again, I might fast forward through pieces of this, but what I really want to give you is the landscape of what the family office domain looks like today, and what do those types of structures look like. How do family offices define family office versus the SEC? I want to look at the spectrum of giving structures. There's a lot of different structures, as you already know. So I'm not going to go into details because, full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. So I'm not going to explain CRTs and charitable lead trusts and all of those things because I think those are probably domains that you're already pretty, familiar with. Where I'm going to focus is more about how does a family office think about how to come up with a broader plan and utilize the different types of structures? I'm going to bring up the giving pledge, and I'll tell you why. Um, because it's created a call to action, but we're not seeing the same kind of action that we need based on the call. And I'll tell you about that. And then I'll talk about some of these different offices, but I'm mainly going to focus on the Cordis family. Let's do a quick poll. Bear with me while I share my screen over to the poll for you. Now, just full disclosure, this polling software does not record who you are or any identifiable information. So you can feel comfortable with answering and not, oh, did I not share it yet? Sorry about that. Let me go back and do this. Here we go. Can you see it now? Okay. So use your phone, scan the QR code, and it should pop up this question, and you should be able to respond. And then I will share the results. And I know there's about 60 of you on the call, so I'm going to look for, oh, it's popping up already. The numbers, and by the way, you're ranking in terms of what you see the most. You could rank one thing, you could rank all of these, so that gives you a little bit of optionality. All right, I'm seeing a thumbs up. You can even comment on this poll if you want. I'm just letting it count up. So I see we've got 22 responded, so I know 19 are in there. So I think what we're seeing here is right on. So more than half of the giving primarily is done through foundations. And I do see a lot in increase, and I'm going to show you some really powerful data statistics around donor advised funds. That is increasingly going hand in hand. And community foundations are really important. Investment management of charitable assets, let's see, somebody gave us a little comment here. No audience questions. But yeah, there's a growing body, right? And I'm gonna say that GRATs, CRTs, CLTs, those are very instrumental as well. Now hold this thought while I'm gonna go back to the presentation. Nope, not that chair. Nope. Let's go back to this one. Okay. So what are the demographics? What do they look like right now? Well, it's impressive. The landscape of the affluent has been growing massively. In fact, wealth probably over the last decade has really mushroomed, doubled for the top, call it 1 and 10%. It's 12%, the growth in the numbers of high net worth, ultra high net worth in just the last year. And the wealth is around 60 trillion that we're talking about in terms of like overall net worth. And so that's an astounding 2 times the US GDP. So I think what's very notable is that there's about a 500,000 people that are in this ultra high net worth space. What do we mean by that? 30 million and up. And we know family offices are significantly larger than that. But what's happening is there's a rapid rise of founder offices that are being generated as a function of this. And, North America still remains the largest hub of this wealth. I think what's really powerful is those couple stats at the bottom. That Gen X and next gen donors by 2040 will comprise 80% of the ultra high net worth givers. And that's an astounding stat right there. With 207 billion in personal donations in 2023, more than a third of all the giving globally. So this demographic really moves the needle significantly when we think about how wealth is redistributed or not, right? And I bring this one up. This is a JP Morgan chart. Just in the last, 5 years, we see how the top 20% has just massively expanded its net worth compared to the bottom 80%, right? And so with this dislocation, we're also seeing the inequality between the haves and the have-nots and the ramification that that's having. So this is an important reminder of the power of means and the power of giving. And when I think about that income inequality, what's astounding to me, again, so these are different geographics. We're North America and Oceania here. We are seeing how incredibly the top 10% is, 70% of both income and wealth. And so we see this inequality continue to drive this dislocation and then the need to sort of where are we leveling the playing field? Because we know that the high net worth individual space, their interests around giving has a lot to do with poverty, inequity, social justice, and many of the trends. I got to bring up DAFs because the rise of the DAF has been formidable. When we think about, 5 years ago, the number of accounts and the size, right? The DAF in terms of billions, I mean, it's more than doubled in the last 5 years in terms of the total value, tripled in the almost 2.5 times in terms of number of accounts. So I see over and over how the donor advised funds are an incredibly mission critical element of facilitating liquidity and distributing wealth more seamlessly, and I'll get into that. Let's talk a little bit about family office structures because, again, several folks were asking, what is a family office? And there are a lot of different definitions of family office. Like I said, the SEC has a very, very stringent definition requiring that everyone is one bloodline and related, can't be more than 7 generations. And so the family office exemption has been a wonderful opportunity for families that want to invest together, own a structure together, and potentially do a lot more than just investing, right? Sometimes it's related to how they manage reporting, compliance, operations, fiduciary oversight, personal services. There's a whole gamut, right? Financial planning, tax prep, administration. So again, I think the importance to recognize is that family offices are like hedge funds and that it's like in the eye of the beholder and how you define, well, a hedge fund can be a lot of different things. So can a family office. I've given you four sort of macro buckets to look at. The virtual office is oftentimes a founder office just getting started. It might be a smaller coordinated office with not a lot of headcount, and really relying on outsourced partners to facilitate the structure itself. Tends to be lower in overall threshold of assets. Again, it may or may not actually administer or operate charitable giving, and sometimes that's driven on the family level. So it tends to be very, very virtual in structure and reliant on that professional infrastructure outside or other institutional structures. And then what we hear about the most, the single family office, is a more formalized approach. It may or may not directly invest and oversee and manage money. Sometimes it will use a third party investment advisor or do it through an RIA or another financial institution or a financial consultant, investment consultant. Those assets tend to be larger. Why? Because they're typically building out more infrastructure inside of those entities. And again, they can be any number of legal entities. So it usually has a lot to do with tax planning and considerations for ownership. They also tend to work more in a multi-generational lens. So single family offices, you don't build them for 1 or 2 decades. You're building them with generations in mind. So their planning tends to be more on a longer horizon. And so that inculcates also the investment thesis and the wealth transfer. And back to philanthropy, those offices are more likely to probably oversee some elements of charitable giving. It might also be part of their impact strategy inside one or more of their investment portfolios. It also might be as a function of how they're operating the foundation or other charitable entities, or even working with their local community foundation. At the bottom of this slide, two different sort of structures. There are closed multifamily offices, not open to the general public for providing their services, but might be a mixed hybrid of a traditional commercial family office. And so this is probably the least common structure, but it actually, there is some sort of clubs and families that coalesce because they have aligned values and they see the ability to create economies of scale together. Now, what we see most out in the marketplace are commercial MFOs. And we also see larger banks, financial institutions who have family office service delivery models. And what do I mean by that? They've actually built out capabilities to do multifamily office services in addition to maybe providing the investment oversight, reporting. Sometimes it's tech infrastructure as well. And so the multifamily office is a growing place that has proliferated, I would say, in the last 2 decades. I spent a decade inside of a multifamily office, so can speak to that from my own professional experience and have really seen how they have morphed over time to be more full service, high touch. And I think there's pros and cons to all of these structures that I'll get to. Now, from an org chart, this is a pretty clear sort of understanding of what does a single family office structure typically look like. Again, there are many different variations of this. So this is just a sample. But why I thought this was helpful is the single family office oftentimes is working with several different third party. And so a single family office might have 50, 60, 70 relationships beyond just the people inside who work there. And that might extend, I mean, the whole philanthropic landscape is vast, as we know. So that could be consultants helping with lobbying, if that's where you're putting your charitable dollars and impact dollars. It might be, your accountant, your outside attorneys, if you have operating companies, family business advisors, investment consultants. So these are sort of the traditional realms that the family office operates. And increasingly, there are more and more families that are really making impact and giving the central thesis of their family office. I would say it's not about all tax deductions. And, for some families, that's a big motivator, but it's not necessarily the driver, the why. Digging in a little bit, I mean, this really simply is explaining how there's multiple families, unrelated, different sizes, different needs, different places in their life cycle, some coming right out of liquidity events, others having dynastic trust terminations, single family offices who say, you know what, we don't know that we want to continue to operate as a single family office. I've seen many clients who are finding their ways to multifamily office providers because operationally, it's hard to compete. MFOs can put more money into their infrastructure, more money into compensating their people and retaining them, more money into research. And quite honestly, we know that AI is in all of our worlds right now, and MFOs are certainly thinking a lot about that. So, moving on, I want to just talk about some of the differentiators between the single family office and multifamily office, if this isn't clear enough, and bring it back to this philanthropic lens. Single family offices might operate with a much more clear sense of who they are, why they exist, what their values are related to the family of origin. They might have all different kinds of control and customization views on what they want their single family office to spend money on or not to spend money on. They oftentimes have a higher fixed cost structure depending on size and scale. Now, we know investable assets often are on a fee scale. The higher the assets, and if you're concentrating them with one or more providers, you might be able to get price breaks, significant price breaks. So there's quite a bit of variability on the investment fees, depending on if you manage that in-house or you outsource it, if you're active versus if you're passive. Again, back to impact investing, there's an increased breadth of wonderful providers out there that can provide research, can provide customized impact guidance, can help families really think through their impact mandate and how they want to affect change using their investment portfolio as part and parcel of the driver to do that. And so I think that's what's really exciting is to see a shift globally that it's not just about writing checks or making grants or PRIs. It's a bigger opportunity to leverage the pool of capital that a singular bloodline family has created to affect change and positive good. Family governance inside of a single family office really means that oftentimes the family is controlling and directing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how families might play different roles depending on where they sit. And, the other thing I want to stress about the multifamily office, it's great at scaling. It's great at bringing down overall costs for technology, infrastructure, for reporting capabilities, and then having, really bespoke subject matter expertise. And again, they might be able to highlight and feature a well-known, impact investor or thought leader in this space, say like a Liesl Pritzker, and bring them in to highlight at an event versus a single family office who likely isn't might see a thought leader on a Zoom. One of the other critical things around giving is privacy. I think there's an increased understanding that different structures have different levels of privacy, and the Structuring for Impact report from PPG is a wonderful resource that really talks a lot about, you know, you have a lot more privacy and lack of transparency into what you're doing with your giving, if that's important to you, back to single family offices and control. And you don't have to be as public if you want to structure things, uniquely or differently, versus obviously 501(c)(4), private foundations and giving, where your 990 is going to show exactly what grants you've made and to whom and how much and when. So again, I think privacy is a major consideration, and I see families who want their name on the structures. They want their name behind the initiatives. They put out the press releases. And then I see the families and individuals who want to move the needle, do not want to take any recognition, or you know, they want to keep it very private. So I think that's very, very important to understand. Now, when we're talking about staffing, I think one of the things that's sort of interesting is the roles really differ. Um, you know, there are, like, if you're a single family office utilizing a DAF, you may not need to have any people really implementing that structure. It might be all being directed by a family member or a committee that's around allocating funds for a group through a DAF. But I think the infrastructure creates a lot more variability. And again, when we think about scale and the multifamily office, and I'll hit on this in a little bit, some of the structures, I think like the DAF is something that, is very attractive to multifamily offices. And I think LLCs, and obviously using the family office as a mechanism to deploy capital strategically and tactically in impact or giving is much more flexible, dynamic, getting family members involved, getting specialists involved. So let's do a little talking about giving options and structures. So I mentioned how important the having a broad toolkit, and that many different entities can be utilized. I think you're absolutely right on that private foundations are what I most commonly come across, hence why we have so many wonderful organizations. And I see more and more single family offices recognizing the power of community foundations as their partner, to affect and know their region, to be able to affect change if that's their goal at a local level strategically. And so the private foundation really doesn't operate necessarily alone. It oftentimes is going to reach out to if the larger private foundations will oftentimes reach out to peers who have similar giving ethos or interests, and also strategically think about how do we align together to work more impactfully around an issue than if I'm deploying, call it 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 into a cause or an issue. Now, I also see more and more hybrid vehicles that are being utilized to also engender perhaps different family members to participate in impact oriented types of activities and to inspire more creative change. And I think that is a growing area that I'm seeing, especially with Rising Gen, which is really inspiring. And again, I want to just talk about the fact that giving is often woven through the estate trust tax planning. So it is all part of a broader ethos and discussion around legacy. I'm not going to go into each of these vehicles, but you'll have them in your deck as reference, because I have several things to get to. The MFO similarly is working across, and will work with the single family office, right? Sometimes if they're being used in part as an outsourced provider. So they may or may not be providing, the all the infrastructure for a single family office, but they might be offering different access to donor advised funds, or they might actually be partnering with different structures and providers to the foundation space. So I'm thinking about all the increase in automation and facilitating grant making and facilitating due diligence when you're looking at making a grant. So they might be very instrumental in helping families plug into existing philanthropic resources or even connecting to thought leaders and organizations that support, more bespoke giving. So again, I think the power is to think about single family offices building their infrastructure and thinking about what they want to drive purposefully, individually, and MFOs typically commercially providing access to resources to support the impact space, the giving space. Let's see, I'm trying to. Okay. I want, before I jump into the giving pledge, I want to get your poll. I'm going to do a quick poll again, if you don't mind, and just see what you think about where philanthropy and impact are making the biggest opportunities and why are families going to those spaces. So, if you don't mind, take a moment and share with me what you think. Philanthropy and impact investing are opportunities to inspire shared giving and or impact across a family, educate the rising gen about wealth matters, bridge values among different generations, make meaningful change through giving or impact investing, invest, give strategically, people, planet, profit, and purpose. Again, this is a ranking one. So we'll see what you guys think in terms of what rises to the top. And I'll just, while this is coming in, I'm I'm really seeing a shift in some of the families I work with who are bringing up to investment committees, hey, I want to think about investing the foundation corpus differently, or I want to bring up, I mean, this has been going on for a decade now, but more and more rising gen feeling more competent and confident to ask, well, why don't we have more ESG or impact metrics utilized from Jen and others to drive some of our investment thesis or IPSs, investment policy statements. So I do think it's interesting to see what is happening generationally and how we're thinking about, and I know I haven't really mentioned it yet, but this massive wealth transfer event that we're in right now, right? 142 trillion at the high end, probably more, transitioning from silent gen, baby boom to the next gen. So there's a lot happening that I think is driving the desire, right, for giving an impact to make a difference and not to just perpetuate. So I'm going to go back and go back to my presentation, and I will get you all these results after the presentation is done. And let's talk a little bit about the giving pledge. I think this is super duper interesting because, again, it hit the news, right? It was very, very popular. It was central casting as we started to see who visibly showed up and wanted to be acknowledged. And again, I know you know more than I do on this, but when we think back to how many lives we've all lived from the start of this, and where probably Bill and Melinda and Warren thought the Giving Pledge would go, there's just been an incredible number of people who've signed up, uh, you know, Bill, I think, has donated more than 50 billion alone. So significant changes, right, that have happened in the 15, 16 years now since it was launched, with more than 250 of the wealthiest individuals in the world putting their names on this. Now, a colleague of mine and I, a few years back, wrote that part of the opportunity and obstacle of the Giving Pledge is that it's a pledge, right? So, how do we get individuals and families who said they're going to do this to actually figure out the roadmap of how to do this? And so, again, a call to action to everyone on the call today who's working with families, who's a family member themselves, is to think beyond how much you want to pledge, but what is the change you want to see? What's the impact? What's the legacy? What's your wealth really for? And take time to do a purposeful exercise of enacting an action plan and a strategic planning initiative around it. Because again, I think where so many families and individuals fall down is they have really good intentions, but the challenge is that we operate at a zero sum, right? For a lot of these 501(c)(3s, and they can't end with a surplus at the end of the year. So it's hard to deploy very, very large checks. And we're talking billions, and we're talking probably many nonprofits, unless you're American Heart and some of the largest ones, aren't getting, $1 million checks, right? They might be getting $1,000 or $500, depending on what kind of organization they are. So there is a call to action to build strategy and structures, hence why I was sort of focusing on some of those structures to help deploy capital more effectively, more efficiently. And again, I think large sums means large sums, compound and they grow very quickly over time. So we also have to think potentially not just what you have today, but what you're forecasting to have in 5 or 10 years. And how much do you really need? How much do you really want your children to have? When we think about Buffett's and Gates, they're looking at, $10 million sums being left to their heirs versus what is exactly the goals that you want your impact investing and your giving to achieve. And I get it inspired by thinking of the power and the potential. I don't have time to talk about it today, but you know, Sean Davis at Merton Venture Philanthropy has been doing a lot with scaling large venture opportunities. And I get excited when I hear about new innovative applications to how to do things more explosively, do things more ambitiously. And who better to sort of showcase or talk about than Mackenzie Scott, because she certainly, found herself in a windfall and has had to really grapple with what is the purpose of her wealth. What does she want to do post Jeff Bezos, and what does that look like? And since 2019, she has deployed so much wealth, somewhere in the neighborhood of, 26 billion. And I think, and thousands of different kinds of gifts and grants through yield giving. So I think what's so inspiring is, sorry, I might have misspoke that. It's around there, but this past year she's giving the largest amount, so that's why something around 7 billion that she's trying to accelerate through 2025. And in our prior years she was giving only a couple billion. So again, very, very significant wealth. But I think what's so uh, important to stress about Mackenzie's model is that she realized that we don't spend a lot of money on operating grants, right? We oftentimes want to fund pet projects or very specific, nuanced ideas that we have for a cause or an area. And she really said, well, we need to give control, right, back to that decision rights. Who's really going to know what to do with this best? But the way her structure has worked, it's very, very thoughtfully designed because she knows that she's not just relinquishing control, she's spending a lot of time to find a whole group of experts, right? That she quietly, researches, selects applications through, and allows this network to really help her vet and figure out how to find the best opportunities for what she's trying to solve. And so I think what's fascinating is how she's been able to, one, increase the grant size, and also how she's been able to, like, lever up the impact by really rapidly deploying so much capital in a way that probably, maybe going back to the industrial age and thinking of Rockefeller and the Carnegies, we may not have seen. She is our modern day female Rockefeller and Carnegie, really putting her money behind significant, issues and areas. And I find it remarkable. I find it inspiring, and I also find it extraordinarily bold. That she's like, hey, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I can build this entire network and really massively change what the expectations are around giving. There's another case study that's kind of near and dear to my heart that I want to talk about, which is the Cordes family. And Marty and Ron Cordes, I got to know when I was writing the second family office handbook because, Marty is the wife, just to be clear. And Ron is her husband. Ron was a founder of AssetMark and sold out in 1996. And I think one of the inspiring aspects of their story is how after that liquidity event, they took quite a lot of time to develop a thesis, to think about how they wanted this wealth to have meaning and purpose and to really connect to who they are and really be the definer of their family office footprint. So this is a wonderful story that I got to sort of learn about firsthand through both the advisors they work with and directly from the family. Their core tenets of the family foundation are to connect, convene, and catalyze. And when they started their family office, it was not a time where impact was really being discussed. ESG wasn't really being discussed. And so it was quite novel for them to think about this. The other thing that Ron and Marty were very keen on are women and felt that, like, boy, we don't invest, right? Only about 2% of venture capital goes to women at early stages. And they also really got inspired by social entrepreneurs as they went to places like Nairobi and other places in Africa. Now, ironically, at the same time that they're getting this off the ground, their daughter Steph was working for Condé Nast. And I remember her sharing this on a panel about how she was looking at the work that her parents were doing, deploying capital, micro lending to social entrepreneurs in Nairobi, for example, and realizing the impact, right? The true impact at the family level that their direct investments were making in these families' lives, right? Because when these women could work, it meant their kids weren't staying out of school to work in the fields in more agrarian type of economy. And she said, I just had this aha moment of, wow, I am selling very expensive advertisements for this beautiful high fashion lifestyle magazine, and seeing what is the purpose of my role? Where am I supposed to fit into all this? Steph has a real passion and love of fashion. And so all of a sudden she saw the opportunity to come and work with her mom and dad and lean in, and her husband Eric is now all part of it too. and saying, well, maybe it's yes, and maybe we can be doing impact investing. We can augment the Cordis Foundation and its giving and grant making. And so, from the beginning, they have been 100% impact, which is pretty awesome and amazing. And I think what also they started to see is that by inviting staff, by creating space and very clear roles and responsibilities, that they could work together really productively and inspirationally. Um, and they could utilize a yes and thinking, right? They could manage their family foundation and wear those hats. They could have their investment committee and have their goals and really thoughtful risk adjusted returns, thinking about they don't believe in impact investing not for returns. They do want to see risk adjusted returns related to that impact investing, and they do invest to win. So, they're not conceding returns with their impact investing necessarily. So, I think what this really starts to show is that, there's been a perpetual myth that impact investing, you have to concede returns. Obviously, that is not the case anymore. And I think AI more and more is also helping us with grant research and information exchange and metrics and benchmarking how both impact portfolios are performing, but also how are the families performing because they're doing this, because they're seeing the positive change that they want to see in this space. And I think this is really, really important because this was a structural choice for them to think about how this foundation and this family office became their platform to do impact investing and to be mission aligned and to learn while they're doing this, not necessarily have it all figured out, but also to help bring in that family member involvement and help them learn up and understand what the driving values are around the family, its wealth, how it should be used, how it can be deployed, and create some pretty impactful change. So again, clear mission, um, anchoring those decisions, strong governance and accountability frameworks, low friction. I think these are really, really important keys. Um, and yes, you might be creating a separate impact LLC from your foundation, but I think what's so powerful is how a decision-making framework isn't necessarily one person making the decisions, but how you can integrate different roles. If you think about who has authority, and it might be a committee, it might be a board, how is that authority making decisions? And do you need people like experts, investment advisors, impact investment experts, thematic, to come in and opine when you're making a decision? And then who's actually executing on that? Who's structuring or papering if it's direct investing in a deal as an LP? Or if it's even through a DAF, how are you doing the research? We know how you execute through a DAF. But again, and then how are you sharing the results, right? If you have a broader family and you want to disseminate how you're doing, and especially in some of those, like I would say, more private structures that don't require, promotion, this is really, really powerful. So again, I think next gen engagement throughout can be a very, very powerful way to train up and give exposure and build in decision making authority and help them understand what decision rights are, putting guardrails on the proverbial highway, and knowing that sometimes mistakes will be made. But hopefully, you've put in enough governance that will help you with downside and mitigating anything that's too substantive. Some of the transferable lessons I think from Cordis are, um, you know, philanthropy can be a leader. It can be a driver for a family office. I've seen other family offices. I'm thinking of one in particular, where it might be around art or it might be around, you know, think about like Alice Walton, right? Incredible. They have multiple kind of structures within the Walton structure, and the ability to have family members have different interests around their foundation efforts. So it doesn't need to be a downstream of wealth. It doesn't need to be after I die, then it funds the foundation, and then, my children or heirs figure out what to do with that capital. I think of it as a tool that should be activated now and be purposeful and be opportunistic. We have incredibly large problems that all of us know that this kind of wealth can actually really move the needle. And particularly where we've seen some things drop off in the US, whether it's around climate, whether it's about social justice, DEI, I believe this is the call to action that the ultra high net worth and the family office space has to pick up. And it's really advisors helping them inspire what they can do, not what they know. And so structure is a governance tool. It's a mechanism. It's not the end itself. So it's going to help house different impact strategies or giving opportunities, but don't focus so much on the structure. Focus on what it's a means to. And then I keep thinking about that earlier statistic that I shared at the beginning about wealth moving on, right, to that next generation, and how it's so important to get them part of that conversation sooner. I liked this sort of graphic because, again, sometimes structure can architect and make you want to think that, like, okay, our foundation, we do grants, we think of it this way. Okay, our impact fund or our sustainable working impact group. I had another family that actually spooled up a whole initiative to inspire their rising gen to want to participate, and impact was where they most wanted to step in and learn. And so they did see it as a stepping stone. But I like to say on the right side, that integrated approach really is creating the economies of scale for the things that you care about, things that you want to make change, and to really think about how you do it systematically with a design thinking lens. Otherwise, the left hand may not know what the right hand is doing, and you might either miss opportunities to scale, miss opportunities to leverage research or knowledge built in one structure to the other structure. So again, I really encourage family offices to think about how they're looking across structures and they're looking across roles to not overlook the opportunities that are embedded. Giving practices, how capital is deployed in a single family office. So I think I've covered some of this already. Again, what I would say is that it's really case by case and unique. Some families start small and they start with that 5% minimum that they're giving from their foundation. Some start ambitiously and they want to jump into larger multi-year grants. They may want to, like I said, build a structure. I worked for another family where a principal passed from a certain type of cancer, and then the surviving spouse really wanted to do a lot to support research, directly fund doctors that were working on research related to the spouse's illness. So I think there's a lot of inspiration that comes from lived and really being compelled to want to make a difference in an area. And I think about how MFOs might do things more periodic and supporting grant cycles, support the operations, but maybe not have they're looking across a very large landscape of individuals and family offices. So they might be looking at a different scale of deployment. They also might look at a much larger fruit basket, so to speak, of lots of different ways that families are going about it. I was going to bring up a little bit about venture philanthropy. It is sort of a burgeoning area. Full disclosure, I'm not the expert in it, but I think it's interesting from the sense that it's more risk for sure. I'm not saying you should go out and do this, but it might be something to look into if you're not familiar with it. And maybe many of you on the call are more familiar than myself with it. But again, patient capital, catalytic can unlock large areas. And I would direct you to Sean Davis if that's something that is of interest that you'd like to learn more about. So again, conviction led in the single family office, really purpose driven, those structures driven by principles. MFO is more institutional, often product led or giving you access to different services. Okay, quick learning check. I was told I should do this, so bear with me. I'm going to switch over to the poll again. And if you don't mind, just for all of you who are testing your knowledge, which statement best reflects the primary difference between philanthropic vehicles used in SFO versus MFO? Is it to prioritize efficiency and pooled infrastructure, while MFOs prioritize customization and control? SFOs often use customized vehicles to align with family values, while MFOs emphasize scalable, standardized structures. Is it MFOs primarily on private foundations, while SFOs? Well, it looks like many of you are figuring this out, and since you're seeing the answers, I probably don't need to wait till the end. But yes, we're getting the there are a lot of opportunities for family offices to use multifamily offices use standardized structures. SFOs often use customized vehicles. So again, these are generalities, but thank you for participating in our little learning check. And I'm going to go back to the presentation. And I did want to leave a good amount of time for some questions at the end. But before I get there, I wanted to give you a tool or an approach. It's similar to what's called the RACI model. And if folks are interested, I've written an article on decision making and thinking about how we get to clear, transparent decisions. And this becomes a little bit gummied up because when we think governance, we have governance in trust, we have governance in investing, we have governance with philanthropy, grant making. We have governance in how families come to make decisions just as a group. So we have governance at a fiduciary level, all these different levels. And when we talk about governance and decision making, what are we really talking about? So one of the challenges that I've really focused on is how do we look at creating more continuity and being clear about how family offices, can make effective decisions. And one of the things I worked on was a thing called the four circle model to help individuals think about where they are in the system. And unlike, the family business model on ownership and management and family, what I think oftentimes gets missed is folks not knowing who they are in relationship to how a decision is being made. Where is their identity? Do they need to be aware of a decision? Do they need to give feedback or opine on it? Do they actually have the authority? And who's actually the one responsible to enact, to follow through with that decision? So if we're in the spirit of like role clarity, mitigating family conflict, thwarting bottlenecks that happens with decisions. I think one of the most important things that this model can offer is a way for you to analyze. How do we get to a decision? Who's wearing which hats? And is somebody wearing all of these hats and really sitting in the middle? And how might that create bias, right, towards a decision? And so this also becomes a checks and balances measure that can really help families understand, you know, the components and who should all be involved. Not every decision necessarily needs someone opining, right? Um, but if you're, let's say, looking at a new impact investment that is foreign and you've never had experience, you might want an expert to give you an expert opinion and share with you, this is great, this is not so great, this is what has happened to others who've done this before you. So again, I think it's really, really important to know what you're solving for and who needs to be involved to get a clear decision made. And this can affect change at the foundation level, the investment committee level, family office operations level, and oftentimes just clarifying who has authority, which when we talk about trust, we know trustees oftentimes have authority to think about the investments, think about the risk associated with those assets. And who executes may or may not be the same as who has authority. So I really find in a lot of the families I work with on the single family office side that family boards, family councils, investment committees, these philanthropic structures, foundation boards, et cetera, private trust companies, these are the main governance structures or bodies where decisions are being made. And I really, really encourage each of those structures or those bodies to think about who is doing what and if they're being consistent, right? Or if they're setting precedent. We didn't really go through the proper channels to get to that decision, but we did it anyways. And don't be afraid to do a postmortem when you've made a mistake and to go back and say, what should we have done differently? So, again, this four circle model has a lot of different applications, but I think it's also helpful to recognize that some of the reasons why philanthropy struggles at times is not being very clear on what's driving the decision or who's driving it. And I've seen families, I'll tell you a story where I worked with a family and they really wanted their rising gen to be involved with the foundation giving, but the rising gen had no interest in what the foundation mandate was all about. And so the family couldn't understand why nobody was coming to the table and showing up. And so it became a real grind, a real friction point with elders and grandchildren and saying, hey, why isn't this happening more effectively? Well, again, we have to find where there's affinity and interest, and it's really difficult to voluntold your rising gen to care about something that you don't care about. Where I've seen it successfully done well is junior boards, where a certain subset of funds might be allocated from a charitable fund or from a foundation, and you're giving it a more microcosm to those who say, I want to participate. You're providing them the education and training, and then you're helping them develop ways to work together. Who is going to be in charge of what? Who is knowledgeable? Who wants to opine on these different decisions? Who else needs to be made aware of what we're doing? So, again, this model can be really, really powerful and applicable in sort of junior board situations or working committees. I mentioned that Sustainable Investment Working Committee. So, lots of different ways to enable so that you get to faster, higher quality decisions. You can bring down potential for conflict. You can also create accountability and you know really who's responsible for which parts of a decision. And it really helps to inculcate the next generation about what does it mean to be responsible and what does it mean to rise up and be prepared to be engaged in those leadership discussions when those transitions are happening. So, authority might happen, at the founder principal level, the board level. I've sort of shared with this and talked about sort of the key, decision points, whether it's making decisions around budgets, what we're going to give to, types of grants, types of PRIs, what's our risk level in terms of, where we're giving, the size and scale and types of giving or impact investing. And also, authority can sometimes be concentrated in a certain subset of deciders or doers. So, what do I want to do? And I'm leaving ample time for us to have a pretty engaged conversation here at the end. Um, but because so much money is in motion, I cannot stress the importance of action and being supportive to su inspire and support individuals and families to think bigger and more potential of what the change they can enact with where they sit today. And sometimes, wealth holders operate with a very scarcity mindset around, well, will I have enough? And what does this really mean? And should I, level up on my lifestyle, or should I level up on my giving or my impact investing? And I think the more we can inspire around what the dislocations are that we're seeing in the space, creating the call to action to help them see how to implement change, and also to help them understand by giving role clarity, empowering decision makers, empowering parties to feel accountable to a process to get to a decision can be so powerful. And don't kid yourself, scale does come with challenges. Deploying big dollars is not perfect. But I would say build the muscle. Start where you feel comfortable, get inspired by others, join different organizations, philanthropic initiative, council foundations, find your local community foundation, partner with experts, read, whatever it takes to get you to get inspired. And then the network, the Omidyar network. There's all these incredible networks, the Impact, Gin. So I can go on and on about the power of connectivity and inspiration, but I come back to this governance piece because a lot has to do with the means of how do you make a decision, what structures are you using, and how do you amplify your process. So that is what I have. I did want to let you know that um, I have some resources. These are the references from the presentation. I also have an article on the Giving Pledge, as well as an article on the four circle model, if any of you are interested in those, and we can make sure to get those to you as well. And then let me show you one last thing, if I can find it here. We're also going to be sending around a capabilities chart that will show you different structures and what types of grants and what types of different structures are useful to use and deploy different types of capital, be it through 401c3s, 4c4s, foundations. And so I think that is another really, really helpful leave behind from today's discussion. All right, Allison, are you there? Do we have questions? Do we have comments?
I am here. I'm looking at the Q&A. I don't have anything unanswered right now. Maybe we could
Okay.
jump into the questions we've already received.
Sure. So what should I talked about the family office definition and the family office exemption. So I'm going to skip to the next one. What should a new family office prioritize in year one to ensure long-term philanthropic success? Well, year one will never tell you exactly if you're going to be successful, but good practices are to really look. I always like to do a look back of where have folks found energy and interest in giving, and start to do an audit. Take ownership of what activities, what things you've already done, who's done what, and start to look across, right? The giving spectrum to see where things seem to coalesce. Where do you have a lot of interest? Because before just jumping into structure, like we should set up a family foundation, I oftentimes caution folks to recognize, do you have enough energy and interest to operate a private foundation? Do you have the right infrastructure around you? Some families find it much more convenient to give through DAFs, right? And again, you give up control, right? Those assets no longer become yours once they go into that donor advised fund. But there's so much convenience around how you can allocate quickly. So I think understanding what are your goals, where you have affinity, what are your metrics for success. Do you have benchmarks that you want to align to? Are there other family offices or foundations or other providers that you want to look to for those metrics? And then I would say check in regularly. So success isn't a one and done thing. You really have to monitor, stay on top of it, and keep, course correcting because it may not always be perfect. Is philanthropy used more as a tax solution for your clients, or are they coming to you with a history of philanthropic giving? That's a great question. So it depends on who they talk to first. If the tax advisor was driving a lot of the strategy, it might be an afterthought. If it's not their prerogative, it might be helpful. Tax might be a part and parcel to it. But I see a lot of families have goals and giving interest beyond the taxable benefits where they find them. So I think it really depends on the nature of the individual, and I think it really depends on um, where they, put their money first. Are they going to the tax advisor saying, "Can you harvest as many charitable deductions as possible?" And if that's the case, then it's usually the afterthought. If they're saying, "I'm really passionate about X, Y, and Z," and their accountant and their tax advisor saying, "Oh, that's great," because that dovetails with this. So I think it's really important to know who's first and who's second, um, and to work in tandem, work together, not one or the other. When do you bring up the subject of time horizon, whichever vehicle the family uses? So, I think time horizon has a lot to do with corpus of wealth. When families don't have significant, when I say significant, tens of millions, hundreds of millions plus, they may see their wealth spent down just through inflation, cost of living, distributions, lifestyle. Investment performance won't always be like it's been. So, you know, I really think time horizon has a lot to do with where are you starting from and how much do you really want? What's your goals? I love Monte Carlo simulations and doing capital sufficiency analysis where you can help a client look at prioritizing which goals come where. And if, you know, giving 50% of their wealth away and they qualify for the giving pledge is on there, and they have all these other goals in mind, but that's the fifth goal. It may mean that they don't have the runway to do what they want to do. So I think time horizon is in the eye of the beholder, and different structures can outlive and be there forever, but not necessarily. Um, as a development officer at a nonprofit organization, how can I best serve the advisor and donor? So I think back to that decision making model, think about where they fit. What do they need to know? How much authority do they have? What are their mandates if they have to execute on either making a grant to your organization or reporting out how your organization, your nonprofit is doing? And so really being clear on your relationship to the yes and I mean, your donor isn't the only key stakeholder. Advisors are going to want to bring more qualified donors to you if they see that your organization is really moving the needle and implementing that capital well in whichever sort of charitable area that you are. So I think best serving them is communication, getting them what they need to know on a timely basis, knowing what they're accountable for, the advisor back to the donor and vice versa. And I also think there's just, important to foster that relationship to see where the puck is moving, so to speak, and not just thinking about the now, but what is next. And how do you inspire them about where you're going, what you see changing, how they might be able to leverage more than just their dollars? Maybe there's bigger strategic capital opportunities that you're only looking at the grant with the blinders on, but maybe there's a lot more potential. So advisors sometimes know a lot more about the donor than you will. So again, I think it's really working strategically and seeing them as partners. Okay. What has been the biggest impact on using new structure compared to the old way? Well, like I said, I think some of the ideas going back to Mackenzie Scott of like how do we deploy capital more massively into a lot of different areas and before maybe it's dripping on and not as significant move the needle types of grants or impact investments, I think we're seeing a shift where people are starting to get more comfortable. And again, I think this has a lot to do with your relationship to risk, your tolerance for loss, your appetite for experimentation, and also your trust in the infrastructure you've built to be able to deploy. So I think that's, through venture capital, through larger move the needle grant deployment activities, these are where I think we see a significant departure. And I also want to call out that next versus now giving. I see a lot more families who say, we have real problems right now that are impacting me and my children. I can't wait 10, 20, 30, 40 years till I'm not here for somebody else to try to fix those. And they're actually front loading giving an impact because they're really concerned. They're very fearful of the some of the directions that things are headed, and they feel like this is the only way they can take back some control. So again, it may not be through visible structures that you can go out and readily research. It might be through private LLCs and hybrid vehicles, but I do think people are funding all kinds of medical research. People are funding climate interventions. So that's what I think is very, very exciting. It's just really hard to talk about because it's so private. Um, what has been the biggest impact on using the new structure compared to the, oh, I just talked about that. What does community mean to your families? That is a really good question. It doesn't mean it doesn't the same thing to it's back to that snowflake analogy of the family office. Every family will, sometimes they'll include their friends and family only in that. Some are looking at their local, regional, peers and their geographically, right? And then I see community in the sense of like, where are we building community? Meaning, where are we like connecting the dots of folks that have shared interests, like-minded belief system, morals and values, desire to make changes in certain areas, and that community building that's happening both through advisor networks, donor networks, community foundation networks, right? That's a whole transformational kind of element to giving that to me is super exciting because I believe that is where we're headed is more community alignment around action and giving needs and being creative. I I I feel like the the pain points are where it's usually the most knowledge about the problems that need to be solved, not necessarily at the researcher level, but actually getting boots on the ground and getting direct exposure. You see that a lot with Bill and Melinda Gates over the years with how their activities in Africa and just really being front and center, not just hearing from all the experts opining to them. They go and they witness. So I do think community is at that local level, but it's bubbling up into a much bigger global network.
Kirby, just to close things out, I would be curious. I know you said that there was a trend of private foundations working with community foundations or other people, that may have expertise in a specific geographic area. Can you give an example of a private foundation, community foundation collaboration and kind of what that looked like?
Yeah, I'm not going to name names, but worked for a family where they knew that the community foundation had much deeper insights and intel with relationships at the local level. And they actually wanted to have some level of anonymity with how they were going to sort of touch the local level because they knew there was so much competition for their dollars. And so they really worked hand in hand with the local community foundation to think strategically about how they could leverage their knowledge, help them prioritize the need, help them see the landscape of giving issues in the area, whether it was food deserts or on the job training and skill development for, lower middle class folks to, poverty and hunger. And so I think where community foundations and private foundations have a wonderful symbiotic relationship is they both care. They both want to impact good. And, usually, and you can tell me, Allison, but a lot of, right, the charitable entities locally, the nonprofits are coming to the community foundation to say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're excited about. This is what we're trying to figure out how to solve. We know we can unlock X, Y, and Z were we to have these kind of grant commitments or this type of capital. So for that single family foundation, the community foundation was instrumental in building that partnership and leveraging. And so some of their assets actually were deployed through the community foundation. Some was just sharing knowledge and sharing wisdom because that single foundation that family foundation was also giving at a national and global level as well, but they had allocated a significant amount of assets towards the local community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A, so I want to just thank you so much, Kirby, for presenting today. You gave us some great insights, some great food for thought. For anybody who attended, we will be sending out a follow-up email with the structural diagram Kirby discussed, and we can also send the slide deck, which has links to some of the resources Kirby talked about. If you have suggestions on other topics you'd like us to address in future webinars, please let us know. We're always happy to coordinate that. And with that, I will wish all of you a great afternoon and thank you again, Kirby.